Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon and welcome to the next episode of our webinar series that we're hosting here with Enterprise. We are streaming across multiple platforms this afternoon, including Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So we'll just give people a few moments to join. And whilst we're doing that, I will just get the content ready to go as well. Today, we're going to be talking about how do you actually prepare for your first graduate job. Those of you who've tuned into our webinars previously, we've covered loads of great content, including how to ace video interviews, how to make sure your application form stands out. And we've got to the stage now where hopefully that information has really resonated and been incredibly useful. But now you've got the internship or the graduate job. So how do you go about making a great first impression when you get there? That's what we're going to cover today. We're going to whiz through 15 top tips in 15 minutes, just to allow a little bit of time for questions at the end. I will go through the content, and if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat function or on the platform you're tuning in on, and we'll get to those at the end of the session as well. So very quick introduction from myself. My name is Graeme Butler. I work as a talent acquisition specialist for Enterprise based up in Scotland. But just to let everyone know on the call, we do have opportunities currently across the whole of the UK and Ireland amongst our 470 locations. And we'll get to that. But if you do want to find out a little bit more information about Enterprise, you've got our careers website right at the bottom there that you can have a look at for more info as well. So without further ado, let's get cracking with top tip number one. The first thing to bear in mind is that working long hours in your first graduate job is not the best way to impress your new manager. Now, I completely understand that it is important to make a positive first impression when you're starting your new job. Of course, you want to show enthusiasm for the role and, of course, demonstrate the commitment to the company that you've joined. The desire to prove to employers that they made the right decision hiring you often results, though, in new recruits staying at their desks really late into the evening, or virtually now. And as we know, those lines have been blurred, especially if you're working from home or remotely or hybrid. We tend to be working more. Some studies have shown that even kind of above the numbers of 70+% of graduates admit that they work longer than their contracted hours to try and impress their new line manager. However, I do think it's important to recognize that management are far more likely to appreciate the great attitude, your willingness to learn, and how you actually contribute than just the willingness to stay late. And it ultimately comes down to the quality of the work that you're producing that you're going to get judged on, not just how long you stay in the office or how if you're the first person in. So I would always want to focus on the quality, not the quantity. Ultimately, you want to try to avoid burnout, because if you burn out, it's going to affect a whole host of other things and you're not going to be as effective as you can be. So yeah, I get it's difficult. You have to balance the two, and yeah, have that great attitude, but don't just stay late for the sake of staying late, especially if you're staying late just to scroll through the internet to make it seem like you're there. Always focus on your output is what I would recommend doing, instead of just purely being there for those long hours. We all got to do it sometimes, but whatever you can do, try to focus on the quality. So that's top tip number one. The second point is this: say yes, but not to everything. And the reason we put this point is, again, it fundamentally links to the work-life balance approach. You hear this phrase absolutely everywhere at the moment, don't you? And it means something different to every single one of us. But whether, for some people, balance might be 4-day working week. Others, it's working for a company that gives you charitable days, or you have flexibility in the days that you can work. And again, I would say when you come into a new organization, being eager and taking on additional projects and saying yes to kind of put yourself out your comfort zone is a positive thing. It's a great way to get yourself known in wider bits of the organization, whether it's joining a charitable committee, or it could be working on a project within the organization, or the company you're joining may just want some new insight. I know Enterprise, who I work for, great example, after 60 days, we invite graduates back to give us a business improvement idea. What's something that you've noticed when being in the business that we can improve in 60 days? It could be a process. It could be how we go and do business to business marketing. You get the idea. But I would say this, and I've seen this happen time and time again, is that saying yes to absolutely everything, you can spread yourself too thin very, very easily. And what happens then is you miss out on what I'd say is core deadlines or the core function of your job, which again isn't going to do you any good. It's actually going to be more harmful. So I've seen it time and time again. People say yes to too much. So mastering the art of saying no is important. And you know, I'm not one for the zodiac star sign, but I'm a Libra, and as us Libras say, it is all about getting that right balance. And you have to understand what the core element of your job is, what's going to impress your manager. Absolutely. Don't say yes to everything. Again, it can ultimately cause you more problem than good. The next one, top tip number 3, is an incredibly simple one, but remembering people's names, how you spell their names, how you pronunciate their name as well. A great example, I've had this numerous times in the past. My name, Graeme, is spelled Graeme. It is my email signature. It's in my email address. The amount of times that people send me an email which says, "Hi Graeme," spelled Graham, people can find that a little bit frustrating. Or if your name is Claire, a lot of people spell it with an I, some people spell it without an I. It's something to bear in mind. It's about respect, it's about paying attention, and it can be those little things. Now, again, in the virtual environment, this has actually improved a lot, because a lot of us, when we're dialing onto calls, our names pop up in the window, which makes it simple. But actually, whether it is virtual or not, people do get really frustrated if you have to reintroduce multiple times. If you've met this person multiple times and you've forgotten their name, it's easy to do. And if you're meeting people in person, the trick that I was always taught is, as soon as someone's introduced themselves and given you their name, repeat it back to them. Repeat it back to them, you know, say, "Hey Graeme, lovely to meet you." Absolutely. And also try to think of some sort of maybe little trigger that you can remember. For example, if you're meeting me virtually, you might think to yourself, Graeme, the guy who had the stag on the wall or the faux plant wall, something like that, and it just might stick a little bit better. And I would always say, for me, a big difference between successfully studying at university and seeding a work life is that ability to kind of collaborate and work well with others. It makes a big, big difference. And I would say that you want to try to introduce yourself to as many different people in the possible, because again, studies have shown that kind of over 60% of employers said it's really beneficial to the company when graduates really kind of quickly integrate themselves into the workforce. And again, getting yourself out there, attending many different social events as you can, you might meet some really interesting people, and then hopefully you'll be able to remember the names, and then you'll be able to volunteer, as I've mentioned, for interesting projects. And, you know, kind of embracing that opportunity to meet new people is something which a lot of us like the thought of, but few of us actually put ourselves out there for. So I really encourage you to do that. But again, remembering people's names goes a really long way, and it stops you making a bit of a blunder early doors as well. This segues really nicely into my next point, which is join something. Sometimes it can be anything. If you've got a volleyball team in the organization, or you have a special interest group, for example, some people may, you know, there's this big movement of kind of home gardening or inside plants. I know lots of people are really fascinated about that, weirdly as it sounds. It could be a committee on well-being, for example, or it could be a special interest group in rock music. Companies now are far better, I find, in giving people that opportunity to join something else and learn as you go. Or it could be something charity related. You know, again, great opportunity through Enterprise, who we work with. We have a direct link up with FareShare and food banks, where many of us have had that opportunity to go and support our local food banks as well, which is something not every company does. And again, this is all about forging those great new connections. So maybe if you join a company, or it's often included in your onboarding, ask that question: what are some options that I have to join, outside of my core work, because I'm really interested in networking and meeting new people. So tip number 4 is join something. And tip number 5 is share your perspective. Now, it is incredibly natural to be nervous when starting a new role, but you have to really, really ignore the instinct that you have to retreat into your shell, as it were. Sometimes it can often be that almost kind of 2/3 of graduates feel that their point of view isn't valued or can actually be ignored. And this couldn't be actually further from the truth, because us as new graduate employers, we want to know your point of view. We want to know your perspective. You're a fresh set of eyes on our business. We've hired you because you've shown great talent to get through our recruitment process and that you really want to be here and forge a career with us. Now, imposter syndrome happens to us all, but you have to have that confidence. You have to have that affirmation. You have to sit and think to yourself, my opinion is worthwhile, it is valid, and I'm here to be listened to. Now, it may well be that this comes up in a team meeting. It could well be that it's on your kind of day-to-day with your manager. It could be in your one-to-one, but you have to make your voice heard. And it's important to kind of get that point of being quickly acknowledged and that you're able to show value. And again, great employers will listen to your opinion, as mentioned already. We do our 60-day survey. We have sessions with our upper management. We are here to listen. And, if you're not asked for your opinion, if it's something which you think can improve the business, you've got to air it, because it could be something which could save the company money in the future, make it more profitable, or actually help with the business growth, or just improve the well-being of all employees there. So it's one of those things that a lot of people are hesitant to do, but you'll feel so much better for doing it. So share your perspective wherever possible. This is something which I always tell graduates when they join Enterprise to focus on. Do you clearly understand what your core job function is? And you've got to focus on this. There is no point putting all your effort and your time and energy into something which isn't deemed as part of your core job. So let me give you a little bit of context on this. At Enterprise, our graduate program is gearing you up to become one of our future branch managers. And the way you do that is by learning all aspects of how to run a successful business, from customer service, sales, business to business marketing, people management, and of course finance, and with some logistics, of course, as well. In your first year, the core element is really, really geared around customer service and sales. So when graduates ask us, what can I do to really get ahead? They really understand that this role is really focused on providing exceptional customer service, becoming an expert as a mobility consultant, and really looking at how they can improve and develop their personal sales and really impact the branch's revenue and profit and loss account as well. There is no point focusing on something which is really, really outside of this. Although it might be really, really interesting, you've always got to remember what your core job and what your focus is. So I would always encourage you, on your first meeting with your manager, always ask them the question, what are your key focuses for me? How can I make a great impression in the first 90 days? What do you really want me to focus on? Because you have to make sure there's that alignment there. So number 6, understand your core job focus and make sure you impact this as much as possible. Number 7, be organised. Yep, it's very easy for people to say that, and yes, this is a little bit of a play here. A pen is a great place to start. Don't just assume that on your first day at work, especially, there's going to be this influx of merchandise. Loads of companies now are moving away from giving all sorts of merchandise because of the plastic and the impact it can have on the environment as well. Now, you may well get, and you'd like to think with a lot of roles, especially if you're home-based, you will often get a laptop and all the desk setup, but depending on your first day and the type of the role, I would always recommend turning up with a very, very minimum of a pen and paper. It's the same with when you get to that assessment centre. Always make sure you have backup pens, etc. Because the structure of your very first day, for example, you may be in meetings straight away, how they do the onboarding, you want to be prepared. On that note as well, if you are going into a physical office location, I'd always recommend people on their first day just to take your passport or your driving license with you, some form of ID, and your national insurance number, because more often than not, these things just like to be checked again, and it just makes things a little bit easier. So I would say bare minimum, always go with a pen, always go with something that you can take notes down on. You just don't want to be that person, that first meeting, to put your hand up and say, oh, can I have a pen, please? That said, lots of companies are going to provide that for you. It's only a small thing, but you just want to make sure you're organised and you make that great first impression. Moving on, top tip number 8, does dress code matter? I'd probably say not as much as it used to. I think with the move to kind of hybrid or home-based working as well, companies have changed and addressed their stance on that. Very few companies, and enterprise certainly doesn't at all now, but very few companies will say you have to wear black shoes or you have to wear a tie or these kind of things. But my advice on always these things when it comes to the dress code is reach out to human resources or the recruiter that you've dealt with, get their advice on the dress code. Does dress code differ if you're working from home versus in the office? Often companies will have an approach which is dress for your day. If you're on client meetings, you may dress differently to if you're having a focus day, for example. What does the day-to-day look like? And if all else fails and you can't get hold of someone to ask that question, I would always want to just pop onto the corporate website, look at the dress code of the people on that website, and that's probably a nice little indicator of what the kind of standard on dress code is as well. There's that age-old phrase, isn't there? Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. That comes undone if you ultimately play on words there again. If you want to be Batman or a superhero, it may not quite add up. So it's a bad joke there, but I think you get the point. I would still stand by this. My grandma, bless her, Grandma Jess, would always say it's always better to be overdressed for an interview. And actually for my first ever job, which was a pot washer, I turned up in a full suit and I felt like a little bit of an idiot, but I did get the job. So there we go. There may be something in that whatsoever at all. The next point number 9, can you read someone's mind? If you are, you may or may not have applied for the right role. You may be in the wrong role, I think is something to think about here. What I would say, the reason I put this point in is don't assume your employer can read your mind. I'm pretty certain you can't read people's minds, so don't assume an employer can read your mind as well. There is no point complaining to people that you're not given more responsibility if you haven't asked for it. Your manager isn't going to instantly know everything that you need on a day-to-day. So not everyone wants more projects, more tasks, but some people do. So be bold, ask for the work, or at least ask to be considered, is my point here. Do you remember your multiplication from school? Tip number 10. I do, as I know that 8 times 8 is 64. And that's how I've always been taught to learn. Repetition is one of my key ways that I learn, but other people learn through visualization, much more pictures, shapes. I've always been much more of an auditory learner. But then there's those other people who are more kinesthetic, who learn much more through gestures, physical objects as well. Understand how you learn and make sure you take in as much information as possible, because it can be really frustrating if you're being trained or you're having to train people in the future and you keep having to repeat the same thing over and over again. So understand how you learn and really embrace that as well. Number 11, office politics. Ultimately try to avoid them. It is easier said than done, but it's so easy to get sucked into the gossip. From talking badly about your peers or other employees to gossiping about relationships or what's going on in people's personal lives. Staying out of it is trickier than you think, but you have to be bold and stand up for the correct chance. If it's not about work and you feel uncomfortable, step away, say to people you're not getting involved. It's ultimately going to save you in the long run. So avoid office politics. This is something that we're huge on at Enterprise. Mentoring. Great mentoring relationships are a two-way process. Many organizations will assign you to a mentor. Often it isn't your line manager. Often it's someone who's been in the business a bit longer. But if you have the chance to be mentored, take it, embrace it. It's an opportunity to connect with someone else in the business, to learn more. And great mentoring relationships are a two-way process. I have a phenomenal mentor in America who works in the same department and we get on like an absolute house on fire in a great way, because being a house on fire isn't a good thing. But we have a great relationship and we catch up, and, I would like to think that she's learned some things from me and I've learned a whole host from her as well. And this is what great mentoring is about, what you can add. And again, if you have the opportunity, embrace it. Ask for a mentor, because I've had so many great mentors in my career and it has been incredibly, incredibly helpful. This kind of point 13 links to a point that we've spoken about before: kill the fear. As humans, we're fundamentally scared of the unknown. I think that goes without saying. Putting ourselves outside of our comfort zone is something that often we don't like to do, and it is natural. A new graduate job is going to be that more often than not. You're going to be learning new things every single day. Some days your brain is literally going to feel like it's going to implode because there's so much new information. But you've got to remember those positive affirmations. You deserve to be there. You've gone through this process. The employer wouldn't have hired you if they didn't think you've got what it takes to be a great employee in the business. You've jumped through multiple hoops to get there, from video interviews, assessment days, face-to-face interviews. You deserve your seat at the table. And again, it's an old cliche. Rome is a great city. It wasn't built in a day. Don't get frustrated if you haven't changed the world in 3 months. We see this time and time again. And, Stephen Bartlett in the Diary of the CEO talks about this quite often, is that, these programs, the corporate world, exist for a reason. You're in it for the long run. Don't get really pent up if you haven't felt that you've made this huge, meaningful impact in 3 months. At Enterprise, our graduate program is designed for a year-long basis. Within the first few months, it's going to be a whirlwind. Some days your feet won't even touch the ground, but you've got to think about that long-term vision. Great example, if you look at Enterprise's current CEO, Christine Taylor, who started as an intern, and our former CEO, Pamela Nicholson, they were in it for the long term, and they've managed to work their way all the way up to a global leading brand as well. And number 14, look for the 1%. I think often you're going to not be able to make huge developmental shifts every single day. Life is not like that. I think you have to look at, we're going to use a really bad gym kind of methodology here from someone who really doesn't go to the gym, clearly. But, if you're trying to lift 200 kilos, you're not going to be able to do it day one. You have to work up for it. If you're training for a marathon, you make incremental changes and work towards it. You don't try to run a marathon at once. So look for a small 1% improvement. And if you can just do something better by 1% every single day, it's going to make a massive difference in the long run. So don't beat yourself up about it, again, if you're not making massive impact. And then finally, the thing just to wrap up on, tip number 15, should I add everyone on social media? Again, my thoughts on this is I wouldn't recommend it. I would say use business networking platforms, make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date, and connect with peers that way, or connect with other people on the same program as you. That is a great way to stay connected, but I wouldn't recommend going around adding everyone on social media as well. So there we go, 15 tips in 15 minutes. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to our careers webpage, where there's loads of great blog content on there as well, and you can find out all about our award-winning careers in management and other departments as well. Hiring now across the UK. Please do also feel free to connect with us on socials. We've launched a relatively new Instagram page that we're ramping up, and of course you can find us on all the major channels as well. We've had a question that's come through, so I'm going to, just before we wrap up with time, because we've still got a few minutes left, we've had a question come through. What's the best way to network, get to know people when primarily working from home? What a great question. There's a number of different areas here. I would say if they're within your immediate team and you're using platforms such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams, I would just directly message them and just say, hey, we're part of the same team. Whether you're collaborating on the same project, I would just say, is there any opportunity for us to, spend 30 minutes, have a cup of tea, have a coffee break, make it kind of informal. Don't just necessarily make it another meeting, because people's lives now have got so many Teams and Zoom meetings. Just make it informal. Just say, hey, let's have a coffee, let's have a catch up. We do something at Enterprise called Cafe Stop, where you'll randomly match with another member of employee in the business, and we'll talk about loads of different things, such as what we're watching on Netflix, what are some of our hobbies, what are some of our interests, and every month you'll match with someone else, and that's a great way to do it. Or if you're working on the same project, or there's someone in your team or someone in the business that you want to connect with, go to them with a really specific question. You could go and say, hey Claire, I know that you're an expert at social media marketing, and that's something I want to get better at. How can I do that? What are your top tips? And often you'll find that people are happy to help. We see this time and time again at Enterprise, where we have something called our Elite Sales Club, for example, which is the top performing members of staff for sales get taken out by the company every month. Often what will happen is if someone's at the top of that sales leaderboard, because we stack rank people, other people across the region or the group will call that employee and say, hey, what are your tips? You know, we're more than happy to share best practice as well. So you have to find something that works for you. So I would say reach out to them directly, find something in common, if not book it in as a kind of as a casual kind of coffee stop or something like that, and that can often work quite well as well. So great question. Hopefully those 15 points have come through and been quite helpful. We've whizzed through those at a great speed as well. So we'll just see if we've got any other questions that are coming through. Okay, here's a great question. Would you connect with your new manager before starting? Great question, absolutely. And I think, yeah, LinkedIn is a great platform for that. Often your new manager may be the person that does your final interview. So I think there's nothing better than prior to start connecting with the line manager. They'll be aware that you're starting. Send them a message and just say, really looking forward to starting. And that's actually a great thing as well. Really looking forward to starting. Is there anything that you need me to do before my first day? I think that's a great question to ask. And that's something, again, which just paints you in a really positive light, absolutely as well. And often a lot of companies, they'll have ways that you can network before starting, or you'll be introduced to your manager there as well. We've also had another question come through. Is there going to be a CV advice webinar? Yes, the 100% is. It's definitely one we're planning on running. So do look up, because we are going to be running a webinar specifically on CVs. We're going to really drill down on just a few things to really make your CV stand out as well. Really complex topic CVs, but we'll spill the tea on all things CVs as well. So there we go. Look at that. 12:29. Please do feel free, if you have any questions about the session, I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. You can just type in Graeme Butler Enterprise, I'll come up. Happy to answer any other questions you may have. But hey, thanks for stopping by, and thanks for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you all soon. So thanks ever so much for your time, and have a good one. Thank you.